My name is SmartAlec24, and this is No Labels Allowed. Hello everyone, welcome to episode 5 of No Labels Allowed. I hope you're doing well and staying safe. Last week I promised you all a movie review, and I am going to deliver. I keep my promises, so we are doing a movie review today. Now, keep in mind this is a podcast, and even though I could just do a video review of the movie like several other people do, I'm just going to keep this in podcast form. I primarily just want to discuss the movie and let you guys go out and watch it for yourselves if you want. All that being said, my first ever movie review for NLA is one of the worst movies ever made, but for some reason, I love it. Strap yourselves in, because we're going to talk about Fateful Findings. Fateful Findings is a 2010 independent film directed by, written by, produced by, and starring Neil Breen. Neil Breen is an architect and real estate agent who has a passion for filmmaking, and he definitely followed through on that. He's made 5 films in the last 15 years, and there's at least one more on the way, thank God. I've seen reviews of all his movies, but the only one of his movies I've actually sat down and watched the entirety of is Fateful Findings, a movie many people believe to be his best, or worst. This is going to get a bit confusing. Speaking of confusing, the plot of Fateful Findings is, well, confusing. I feel like this movie is all just a bunch of subplots that don't go together at all. That said, let me do my best to explain the movie's plot. The movie is about a guy played by Neil Breen who is a writer and gets hit by a car and then gets a magic rock from some random woman and then gets hospitalized but then wakes up from a coma and decides to hack the government, all while his wife becomes unhappy and their friends Amy and Jim fight all the time, and then Amy kills Jim and then her daughter tries to hit on Neil Breen, and then Neil's childhood friend Leah reunites with him and they become a couple, so Neil's wife kills herself, then Neil successfully hacks the government and the corrupt government people kill themselves, and then Neil and Leah live happily ever after at the end. Okay, that's it, bye. I'm just kidding, I'm not actually done yet. In fact, I am far from done. I kind of ran through the plot pretty quickly, but let's slow down and let's dissect this thing. So the movie begins with 2 kids, Dylan and Leah, finding a magic mushroom in the forest. The mushroom turns into a jewelry box for some reason, and then Leah writes in her diary, "It's a magical day." Nothing else, just that sentence. And she doesn't even write it on one line, she takes up the entire page just to write that one sentence. Okay, then. The next day, I assume, Leah and her family move away. A few decades later, Dylan has grown up to be Neil Breen and gets hit by a car. He's sent to the hospital, but not before a mysterious woman gets out of the car and puts a rock in his hand. Somehow the rock wakes Dylan up from his coma, and he just walks home. Dylan doesn't feel stable and goes to therapists, but no luck. Meanwhile, their neighbors Jim and Amy, a married couple with a daughter Allie, are constantly fighting. Eventually, Dylan and his wife Emily invite them for dinner, and then after that, Dylan decides to hack into the government to expose secrets and corruption. This just happens out of nowhere. I don't know what's going on. Later, Dylan and Emily have a barbecue and invite the neighbors, and as Emily puts it, she also invites the doctor from the hospital. The doctor gets a phone call or a text, I'm not really sure. And when trying to pull out her phone, her diary falls out of her pocket and it opens to a page that says it's a magical day. And Dylan realizes that the doctor from the hospital, it's actually Leah. The next day, Amy and Jim fight again and Amy shoots Jim. Amy tells Dylan he killed himself and Dylan is distraught. Well, kinda. He keeps hacking the government, and he and Leah go back to the forest where they found that mushroom. He and Leah get together, and then Emily kills herself back at the house. Then a bunch of nonsense happens, and then Dylan holds a press conference in front of the White House, which is 100% legit, not green screen. He says he's going to leak the files he found through his hacking, even though he doesn't actually expose the government. Government officials begin killing themselves, and then Dylan and Leah live happily ever after. So if any of that made sense to you, congratulations. You're officially the smartest person alive. So give yourself a round of applause and a pat on the back. Okay, but seriously, the plot is very disjointed and there's no clear direction here. Heck, the main plot point, the hacking, which I assume is the main plot point, I don't know, that doesn't even begin until 40 minutes into the movie, and this is a 90-minute movie. It's not just the plot that's bad, pretty much everything in this movie is. One thing that stands out as obviously bad in this movie is the dialogue. There are lines in this movie that just don't make any sense. It's dialogue that a human just wouldn't say. Let me give a few examples. So, at the beginning of the movie, when Dylan is hit by the car, someone says, "It's the Rolls Royce that hit him. I saw it. I'm a witness." Like, Neil, take out that last sentence. No one, you this is only the first example. Okay. Later on, when Dylan and Emily invite the neighbors for dinner, Emily says, "I want you to try some of this new wine," which is fine. But then Amy says, "I'd love to try some of your wine." I don't know anyone who talks like this. Like, it's like the two actresses weren't even filming on the same day, so they don't know how the other person delivered their line and vice versa. Another example, and this is easily my favorite one. At the end of the movie, when the government officials are resigning and killing themselves, one guy says, "I resign today as president of the bank." Yeah, the president of the bank. Alrighty. Okay, Neil Breen. Alright. And yes, I'm not going to forget this. The infamous line you've probably heard before if you've heard of Fateful Findings before this. Dylan finds a dead Jim in the garage. Dylan randomly rubs Jim's blood on his face for dramatic effect, I guess. And he says, "I can't believe you committed suicide. I cannot believe you committed suicide. How could you have done this? How could you have committed suicide?" I can't help you out of this one, Jim. Yeah, I said the dialogue was bad. I think I rest my case. Now, not all of the dialogue is bad, but trust me, the delivery by the actors does not help. In fact, the acting in this movie is pretty rough. Let me make something clear. I am not an actor. However, I feel like there are some common sense rules you have to follow in acting, and trust me, those get ignored in this movie. The biggest example I can think of is Amy. She yells almost all of her lines. Yelling lines is not acting. Speaking of bad acting, Neil Breen definitely fits the bill. I love watching Neil Breen, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that his acting is great. I think my main issue with his acting is that it's all the same. It's the same delivery, same tone, etc. I know I'm not the most qualified to be judging someone's acting, but I do have to say that while I love his acting, it's because it's not good. But that makes it hilarious, and that makes it enjoyable. I don't have a ton to say about the audio and music in this movie. It's not great, but it didn't really bother me either. There is something I do want to talk about. I want to talk about what this movie might mean or what's actually going on, because this confuses everybody who watches this movie. I have no clue what happens in this movie. I have no idea what it's about or what it's trying to accomplish or what the meaning of it is. I don't know if it's trying to tell us to expose corrupt people, because if so, that's fine, but you have to make sure that the whole movie revolves around that, not just 5 minutes of it. There are scenes here and there where a naked Neil Breen is just sitting in a dark room with a giant book in the middle. I don't know what this is. Is this supposed to be like a representation of what's going on inside his head? If so, there is no clear way of knowing. Now, there is one other thing I want to talk about, and that is the logic in this movie. First of all, Jim and Amy's daughter Allie tries to seduce Dylan at one point, and this happens out of nowhere for no reason. There's no reason for it. This impacts nothing in the story. This has zero consequence on anything else. Why include this? Why? What's the point of this? It's just here to take up time to hit that 90-minute mark. Also, there's a scene toward the end of the movie where someone captures Leah for no reason. I don't know. Maybe they found out Dylan was hacking the government, so they sent somebody there. I don't know. If that's what happened. Again, there's no clear indication of this. But anyways, Dylan goes to save her, and she's gagged and blindfolded. So Dylan takes those off and says, "I'm gonna get us out of here, but you can't see what's about to happen." Okay, right here, this is normal. It makes sense because, by the way, Dylan with his rock, he can just teleport and phase through walls, which, okay, whatever. Sure thing. But anyways, so he says he's going to put the blindfold back on, which again makes sense because, you don't want her to see what's about to happen. But then the best part, after he blindfolds her, he says, "I'm going to put the gag back in." What is the point in putting the gag back in? Like, I get putting the blindfold back on because, if you put the blindfold on, that makes sense because you don't want to see, you don't want her to see what's going on. But the gag. Now, there is something about the characters in this movie I don't like, but I can't necessarily blame the actors. Simply put, some of these characters go through mood swings very quickly. Jim and Amy are arguing in the garage in one scene. Then literally the next scene, she gets a call from Emily asking if they want to come over for dinner. And then Amy's just really happy all of a sudden and says, "Oh yeah, we really need the break," and act like they weren't just in a fight. And no time passed either. And if time passed, there's no indication of this. Also, Jim is an alcoholic in this movie, but there are scenes where it either genuinely doesn't seem like it or it's blatantly obvious. There's no in between. For example, when Dylan gets hit by the car at the beginning, Jim is on the phone with Emily, who's at the hospital, and he seems fine at first. But then he gets to the hospital, comforts Emily, and he's still fine. But then literally, the next scene we see him in, he is wasted. At the barbecue, he keeps knocking food over. He can barely stand. But in an earlier scene where he's messing around with his car, he doesn't seem drunk. It's just really inconsistent. People have tried interviewing Neil Breen about his movies, and he seems to give the same answers every time. Long story short, when someone asks a question about this movie, such as, what does the skull head at the beginning of the movie mean? He'll say something along the lines of, "It means whatever you want it to mean. I don't want to tell you how to interpret the movie." Now, I actually find this very interesting, so I kind of want to pick this apart for a bit. The phrase, "it means whatever you want it to mean," implies that there's no initial meaning, at least to me. It implies that you just put it in there for no real reason, whatever it is. More importantly, it implies that it doesn't mean anything to you. There's a problem with this approach. When you make something that has no meaning to you, it won't have any meaning to someone else. For example, when an artist makes a painting, even if it's not clear what it's conveying, the artist has a meaning behind it, even if they don't outright share it. But it will still have a meaning to other people. They can still look at the painting and the title of it and draw conclusions. Your work has to mean something to you before it means something to anyone else. I don't know. These are just my thoughts on the topic. It's up for discussion. Anyways, let me wrap this review up. Fateful Findings is bad. Everything about it is bad. However, this is a train wreck I cannot look away from. I laugh, I get confused, but I also enjoy watching this movie. Even the credits are amazing. Neil Breen, he will credit fake company names and then say that if the company had a B or an N in it, it was fictitious, and Breen himself actually did it. It's the best thing ever. I love it. Even though I criticize this movie, and even though I've stated I'm not the most qualified to judge the production of this movie, I applaud Breen for making movies. It's what he's passionate about, it's what he wants to do, and he's doing that. No one can question that. Overall, I would watch this movie with friends to make for an entertaining watch party. I actually did that with a few of my friends online, and it made the movie so much more enjoyable. If you love bad movies, watch Fateful Findings. And that concludes episode 5 of No Labels Allowed. Thank you all for tuning in. Stay safe and take care.